Welcome to Module 6 in Week 6 for Economics 101, Principles of Microeconomics at Thomas More College. Welcome to the last week of this course. In this video, we'll talk about the big ideas of this module, the learning objectives for this module, and the graded work you should expect for this week. In our previous weeks, we've learned about markets and how markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. This week, we'll explore two possible ways in which that might not be true. Markets can and do fail. We'll start out with talking about externalities. What happens if demand doesn't reflect the true marginal benefit or supply doesn't reflect the true marginal cost? What happens is we end up with an outcome that isn't efficient. We'll talk about how to model that graphically and some possible solutions to that problem. Economists also like to divide different goods into 4 different major categories. We'll talk about how to divide goods into those categories using the concepts of rivalry and excludability. Whether or not a good is excludable and/or rival will determine whether it falls into each of those 4 categories of goods. We'll talk about why markets sometimes struggle to provide 2 of those goods, common goods and public goods. One note of caution. In both this video and your textbook and other videos that you'll see during this week, we have the tendency to think about excludability and rivalry as binary. A good is excludable or not excludable. It's rival or it's not rival. In reality, that's probably pretty much more of a spectrum. But for simplicity, we'll try to stick to this binary definition of excludability or rivalry. The big ideas for this week are big idea number 7. While markets are usually the most efficient way to organize economic activity, in some instances, government intervention can improve outcomes. This week, you should be able to describe, using graphs as appropriate, the consequences of market with externalities in terms of the price, quantity, and welfare implications of an externality. You'll also be able to compare and contrast different approaches to managing the problems of externalities, common resources, and public goods. This week, you have your review and reflect on last week's quiz. You have your homework on Module 6.1 Externalities and your homework on Module 6.2 Public Goods and Common Resources. It looks like a pretty light lift this week in terms of in-class assignments like homework and content engagements. However, keep in mind that you have a pretty high stakes assessment at the end of this week, the final exam. You should redevote the time that you would normally be spending on those extra activities to prepare